Hello students and welcome to Module 8. In this module we'll be discussing using language. So we'll cover topics like how to write for the ear instead of the eye, building credibility with your language, and creating a lasting impression for your audience. Let's go ahead and get started. Let's begin by discussing the use of language. Now, this might sound like a trite concept, as you have probably been using some form of language in school and in everyday life since you can remember, but using language for oral presentation differs greatly from the language we use when writing. Oral style language uses more repetitions and transitions. When you write, it might seem awkward or wrong to constantly restate the point that you're trying to make. However, audience members are not necessarily able to revisit your main points by looking at them, so it's important to repeat and re-emphasize as much as possible during speeches. You are more likely to use personal pronouns such as I, us, we, she, him, and them. In academic writing, you may have been taught that it is wrong to use personal pronouns. However, using personal pronouns in speeches could be used to connect to your audience or communicate a common ground. Oral style language is much simpler. It uses simpler terms and fewer words. No one wants to listen to a speech with a lot of verbiage, so whenever you are giving an oral presentation, it is best to keep things as simple as possible. Oral style language strives to be concise. There is no need for long tangents or expansions. It's best to use short sentences and contractions. Now let's discuss the type of language that are most effective to use during speeches. When delivering a speech, it is most helpful to audiences to use concrete language or language that is specific, tangible, and definite. Abstract language is general and non-specific, leaving meaning open to interpretation. It is the difference between saying, you should vote for this candidate if you want to strengthen gun control, and saying, if elected, this candidate could possibly make strides in reforming gun control laws. It's a lot different. When delivering speeches, it is also important to offer vivid imagery. Vivid imagery brings the senses into play. You could do this by describing a scenario. So, an example of this would be, imagine you're at a Texas Tech football game. What do you see? The faces of excited students that are eager to be amongst friends? What do you smell? Freshly popped popcorn? Sweet soda? What do you hear? The roar of the crowd. So this offers a much more vivid way of saying, imagine you're at a Texas Tech football game. Figures of speech can also be helpful to use during speeches. This slide offers a ton of examples that you could use for figures of speech, and don't be afraid to get creative. Next, let's discuss ways that language can be used to build speaker credibility. Can you remember a time where someone that was meant to be trustworthy pronounced a word incorrectly or said something informally and it made you trust them a bit less? Words have the power to shape how your audience perceives your credibility. In order to ensure that your language conveys a sense of credibility, consider if you're using words appropriately. Does this word mean what I think it means? An example of this would be the time that I heard a student give a speech over the process of phlebotomy, but consistently referred to the practice as philanthropy. They're not exactly the same. Use code switching selectively. Code switching refers to sensitive use of dialect. It can be used to create images of friendliness, sameness, nostalgia, and honesty. It can also clarify the meaning of your message in a way that resonates with your audience. In order to build credibility through your language, ensure that you are using active voice. Active voice makes your statements clear and assertive. It is the difference between saying you have the power to make important changes to the world and saying the world needs important changes to be made. Keep in mind that it is always important to use cultural sensitivity in gender-neutral language. Language should respect audience members' cultural beliefs, norms, and traditions. And lastly, let's discuss how language can establish a lasting impression to your audience. You can use repetition to create rhythm. Repetition reiterates important ideas to your audience. There are two types of repetition that can be helpful in leaving a lasting impression to your audience. The first one that we'll discuss is anaphora. So repeating words, phrases at the moment of successive or at the beginning of successive phrases, clauses, or sentences. An example of anaphora would be, we will work hard every day, every week, every year until the job is done. Epiphora is the repeating of words or phrases at the end of successive statements. An example of epiphora would be, government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from this earth. Alliteration can be used to demonstrate a poetic musical rhythm. Alliteration is the repeating of words and neighboring words in syllables. An example of alliteration would be, why not waste a wild weekend at Westmore Water Park? So that's all I have for this lecture. I hope that you were able to take away a bunch of important information about how you can use language to write for the ear instead of the eye, how to build credibility, and how to make a lasting impression for your audience. Have a great one.